Thursday afternoon to you. A special edition of Sports4CLE, film breakdown, video analysis of some of the position groups in this upcoming draft. We're going to focus on the lines. We start on the defensive line. Browns re-signed Myles Garrett to a big extension earlier in the week. They also signed Joe Tryon-Shoyinka to a free agent contract. But still, plenty of D linemen. We know that Jim Schwartz likes to rotate them in and out, so the Browns need to find some defensive linemen. We will begin with edge rushers in this year's draft, and we're going to take some film breakdown video analysis. Whenever we do that, we welcome in Lance Reisland from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. Today, Lance, defensive end edge rushers, and there's some pretty good ones at all levels of this draft.
Well, the defensive line as a whole is just absolutely stacked. So Abdul Carter, who's going to be my first guy, he and Mason Graham and Travis Hunter is there as well, are my top guys in the draft. This Abdul Carter guy is so talented. But I'll tell you what, there are so many guys. We have three today, but this is the deepest D-line that I can remember, especially in the last 4 years that I've been doing this. Depth, you're going to get guys on late into day 2, into day 3, that possibly could have day 1 grade. So it's a really deep class. Depending on what happens to Myles Garrett, they might be retooling this defensive line, and it's a good year for that if you have to.
We heard yesterday, the word came out of the combine that there's a stress fracture in Abdul Carter's foot. Will not require surgery. Does that affect how you view him if you're one of the teams near the top of the draft?
I say no. I'm a big believer. Everybody's different, but I'm a big believer in the body of work, right? It's just, and I'm going to use this guy as an example, Sam Darnold. Obviously, I know he played poorly at the end, but his body of work was really good last year, and that's kind of what you stress it. You go at with, and his physical tools are there. You cannot teach what Abdul Carter can do physically. He is as explosive as I've seen on film. Change of direction, position flexibility, bend, steps, pass rush, you name it, he can do it, and I don't think so. Not with a guy, the talent that he has. I don't think it bothers him at all.
All right, so here's a look. 6'3", 250 pounds. They converted him from off-ball linebacker to edge the last season, and he kind of dominated. What do you see when you put on the tape and look at Abdul Carter?
Well, the first thing is his raw explosion. You can see just get off, right? So the ball snapped and he's in the backfield immediately at all times. So he's an extreme athlete. Then you're going to see him, he plays the run. He's going to dip inside, play the run. He's one of those guys that kind of does his own thing. Then you're going to see a ghost rush here. He's going to stutter, change pace, and then watch him get underneath that tackle. That's impossible to coach, and that's impossible to block. This is my favorite play for him. He's a stand-up linebacker. You're going to see him change direction and get down the line of scrimmage and make a play on the back. So all these plays demonstrate his ability to be explosive with that first step. As my dad used to say, he arrives, upon arrival, he's very angry. Every time he tackles someone, he's trying to knock him out, and there's something to be said about the violence he plays for. He's got great hands. His athletic ability is that of Myles Garrett type athletes. Now, I'm not saying he's Myles Garrett because he's only 250 pounds, but he is that kind of change of direction. He's a guy who can play in this short scheme. He'd be perfect because of the things he can do. He's like I said, him and Mason Graham are the two best grades I have this year. He's just so talented at everything he does. He's one of those guys who can do it his own way, and not many guys can do it like that.
Yeah, and he would be intriguing. Should the Browns decide, if he's there at 2, they decide to get him. You got him opposite Myles Garrett. They reiterated they don't plan on trading Myles Garrett. The other thing is kind of funny. I was at the Combine. They asked Andrew Berry, is he big enough to play defensive end? And Andrew Berry's answer was yes. End of answer. There was just, yes, he is. This is another guy that's intriguing. Mike Green, Marshall, 6'3", 250 pounds. What do you see when you put on the tape with Mike Green?
Well, it's a lot of what you see with Abdul Carter. Extremely explosive. Great with his hands. You're going to see him get rid of the hands. He's great with his hands. He's a great hand fighter, great with leverage. You're going to see here a great dip, and you're going to see him bend to the quarterback at the end, and that's extreme explosion. Again, he takes on a guard. He's technically sound. He's fundamentally sound. Two things I really like about him. First of all, he plays snap to whistle. Second of all, he was a high school wrestler. And those wrestlers coming from, being a high school coach, I don't think I ever coached a bad wrestler. Some of them aren't, the best athletes or anything, but there is something about a wrestler that is extremely tough. They're very tough-minded. They're extreme hard workers. And this guy fits the bill. 17 sacks last year, led college football. has a lot of the same twitch, a lot of the same suddenness that Abdul Carter has. He's a guy that might be around at pick 33. This is a no-brainer for me. This is a guy who's elite, an elite pass rusher. Once again, just like Abdul Carter, at 250 pounds, he'll have to work on when teams are going to try to run at them to slow them down, because that's the only weakness they have is just their girth. So this is a no-brainer again. Great hands, great balance, great leverage, does everything well. Really impressed with this guy.
So the third one that we're going to take a look at in these defensive edge rushing guys that are available in this year's draft, Josiah Stewart from Michigan, 6'1", 248 pounds. What do you see here?
Well, same thing, real twitchy. So you're going to see him off the edge here. He's really good with double swipe and then bend to the quarterback. He does it. He's very versatile. Played Wink Markendale, which tells you he's got a lot of versatility. You're going to see here great fighting with the hands and then closing ground on the quarterback, causing a fumble. Again, here you're going to see in space, making a tackle in space as a drop linebacker. So again, that versatility that Jim Schwartz likes if the Browns were to take him. Now, the thing I really like about him is his production, right? So he started at Coastal Carolina, and then he moves on to Michigan. 30 career sacks, a bunch of tackles for a loss. This is another guy. Now, he's only 6'1", probably be more of a pass rush specialist. But again, these guys who are twitchy and sudden, they can play the run better than you think. They're stout. They get into those offensive linemen before those linemen can get their big hands on them. These guys are all violent. These are just 3 of about 10 to 15 guys that are just outstanding pass rushers, outstanding against the run, twitchy, sudden athletes. Again, this is the guy, played a lot of different positions. He just does everything so well. Again, he gets to the ball, and when he arrives, he's very angry. A guy I really liked on film, a guy who really played well against the really good teams. You got Jack Sawyer, the kids out of Ohio State. You got the kid out of Texas A&M. There's lots of really good guys. These are 3 guys, though, that'll probably go day 1 and day 2.
So you mentioned a very deep draft, and I know you've looked at some of the other guys. Who are some of the other guys that you like, that you think might intrigue the Browns maybe a little bit later in the draft?
Well, you got James Pierce out of Tennessee, who I really like. I broke him down before they played Ohio State. Mikael Williams is an outstanding player. You got Jack Sawyer. You got Nick, the kid out of Texas A&M. Nick Scoring, really good athlete, long. Shamar Stewart is a guy. There's a bunch of guys who are don't have all the stats, but they fit those measurables. They're long. They're in that 6'1" to 6'5" range, long arms. They're very, they have elite pass rush game plans, which means they use it all, right? They can spin, club, rip. They can beat you with power, bull rush. They play in defenses that a lot of them do different things. And these defenses now, they're different, right? You got to be able to do a bunch of different things. Play linebacker, stand up, play in the space, tackle in space. These guys all do it. So there's a bunch of guys who will be around. Like I said, a guy like Jack Sawyer could be around day 2, and he's got a day 1 grade. So there's so many good players on that edge. The only position I think might be deeper is defensive tackle, which is part of that defensive line.
Yeah, Scorton, the guy that you mentioned from Texas A&M, he's one of the younger guys too. He's under 21, so that would fit in with what the Browns like, age guardrails. It'll be interesting to see if they maintain those or if they stray away from them a little bit as this develops.
Well, it's funny, like you said, there's 3 guys that are generational, right? And what I mean by generational, guys who are going to come in that are going to make a difference right away. And that's Abdul Carter, that's Mason Graham, that's Travis Hunter. So if the first pick is not one of those 3, I would be shocked if the Browns pass on one of these guys. I know they need a quarterback, and you win with quarterbacks. But if they're not sold on one of these quarterbacks, a guy like Abdul Carter, obviously there's not 100% in anything you do in the draft. But boy, these guys are really talented. Abdul Carter especially, their talent is off the charts, and their impact could be felt early.
It's kind of interesting because there are comps to him with Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons is from the same school and has basically the same background. Micah Parsons was an off-ball linebacker till his final year at Penn State. They moved him to the edge, and he and Myles Garrett are 1A relative to defensive ends. No apologies to T.J. Watt, but those are the guys viewed as the top 2. And Abdul Carter has a similar path at Penn State.
Well, the thing that's interesting. So the thing at 250 pounds, the thing that he will be challenged with is teams that run right at him. Now, if he tried to take things on like a normal defensive end and try to square it up or set the edge or do things like that, he will get moved at 250 pounds. But these guys like Micah Parsons, if you see these guys play, they're on their own schedule. They do things their way. So they're the outliers, meaning they can jump inside and get back outside. They can do things fundamentally, maybe not gap sound. They're going to do things that aren't coached because that's how good they are. And once in a while, you get a guy like that. You don't overcoach them. You tell him to go get the ball. And it sounds kind of simple, but rarely, the LT, these guys who are just generational guys, you got to let them go play and don't overcoach them. And you're right. If they were doing things traditionally as a defensive end, then no, he couldn't play at 250 pounds. But he doesn't. He does things his way, and his way is really, really good. So I think he'll be, like you said, Micah Parsons is exactly who he is and exactly how he'll play this year, I think, as a rookie.
The other thing is Jim Schwartz will know how to use a guy like that without question.
Well, when you get a good guy, again, I always use my dad as an example. My dad always believed, don't worry about the weaknesses. Everybody has weaknesses, and that's kind of what coaches, that's kind of what we get caught up in sometimes, saying, we're going to make this guy better at this. My dad never believed that, and that's how I coached. We're going to take what you do really well, and we're going to maximize it. We're going to do our best to work on what you're not good at, but we're not going to make you do those things. That's not what you're good at. So it's kind of like, it's a quarterback position or whatever position it is. Don't overcoach them. Let them go play. Do the things that they do really well, and don't worry about what they do poorly because everybody does something poorly. Don't focus on that.
We're going to step aside, take a quick timeout. We stay on the defensive side of the ball. We move inside to the defensive tackle position. Special edition of Sports4CLE. Be right back. Stay with us.
We're out here busting common lottery myths by talking to real players just like you and you. If an Ohio lottery scratch-off game has 1 in 4 odds, that means if I were to buy 4 tickets in a row, I'm guaranteed to be a winner. True or false?
I'm going to say true.
Oh, that's false.
You're right, it's false. The jackpot for the Mega Millions is at its highest it's ever been before. I now have worse odds. True or false?
True. False.
False? That is exactly right. You can learn more by going to ohiolottery.com/know the odds.
Special edition of Sports4CLE continues. Earlier this week, the Browns released Dalvin Tomlinson because of salary cap concerns. This draft is an area where the Browns can find some help at the defensive tackle position. Again, this is a deep talent pool in this draft this year from the defensive tackles.
Well, you start looking at the Browns defensive tackle room, and they got some really good players in there, but they're getting up there in age, right? Tomlinson's going to be 31. Harris is 33. Hurst is going to be 30, but he's had a lot of injury problems, so his body's probably hurting a little bit more than his age. So they have to start getting younger in there. Hall was a high draft pick, but Hall has been, he has been an elite pass rusher. He has not been elite against stopping the run. So this draft is not only elite for D tackles, it's elite for guys that really fit what Schwartz does in terms of they're big, huge guys, but they can two gap, they can get their hands on, but they can also blow gaps and are very explosive, great with their hands, their short area burst, their lateral quickness. This is a deep draft, both at D tackle and D end. Browns are going to look, they can get a good guy, they can get guys that can make impacts day 1, 2, and 3 at the defensive tackle spot.
Well, the first guy we're going to look at is from Michigan, and it's Mason Graham, 6'4", 296 pounds. There are some that think he's top 2 or 3 in this entire draft, regardless of position. What do you see with Mason Graham?
Well, first of all, he's a former wrestler, love wrestler. So you're going to see him here with his hands. He's going to get on that left guard, and he's going to throw that guard away, push and pull, where he's going to pull him down to the ground. He's explosive. He's got great hands. He's violent. Next one you're going to see, again, on the guard here, he can play rough, but you're going to see him just kind of a bull in a china shop coming through. He can rush. That's a one gap. Now you're going to see him on a stunt where he's going to come to the outside. Again, change of correction, great swim move, plays with great violence. He is outstanding. Now, a couple of people have said, he wasn't as heavy, and for me, these guys, especially these defensive tackles, these offensive linemen, it's paralysis by analysis. You start breaking these guys down, and you're like, oh, this guy doesn't do this, and this guy doesn't do this. Pop on the film. These two guys from Michigan are elite. That's why Ohio State didn't win the football game. They tried to run the ball at these two. This guy is a elite guy, will be an all-pro, I think, in the NFL for a long time. He's super athletic. Again, I love wrestlers as a coach. They're just tough. They just know how to play with leverage with their hands. Great player here. If Browns don't go, if they don't go with quarterback at 2 and they trade down or whatever it may be, this guy is definitely in the mix. He's outstanding.
Yeah, and there are some that say Mason Graham is the safest pick of the draft, that you know what you're going to get as an NFL player with Mason Graham. The second guy we're going to look at, you kind of alluded to him, another Michigan guy, Kenneth Grant, a little bit bigger, 6'3", 331 pounds.
We're going to see him, another guy with great movement skills. So you're going to see here, he's on the nose, great swim, gets in the backfield, forces a quick throw on the screen. Extremely explosive for 330, 340 pounds. You're going to see him here lined up in that A gap, and then you're going to see him just drive that center back. That's what he does best. And then you're going to see him here. He plays the run, gets on the guard, gets his head up, extends with those big, strong arms. So he's really, really strong. He can rush the passer. Again, he can play 2-gap on first and second down. He can play the line of scrimmage a little bit. But he's athletic enough where he can rush the passer too. This guy, he really came into his own because Graham had a little bit of an injury this year where he was out a couple games, and Grant got to really thrive in those situations. Again, those two are the reason they beat Ohio State. Obviously, Ohio State's game plan helped the Wolverines, but Ohio State tried to be as tough as these guys up front. These two are elite size, speed, strength. They're not just plug guys in there where they're just big, heavy guys that stop the run. These guys can get in the gap and go. Kenneth Grant's going to be a great pro as well.
In your mind, what separates Graham from Grant? Graham's usually ranked a little higher. Why do you think he's ranked a little? And again, we're splitting hairs because one's like 5th overall and the other one's like 20th or something like that.
I would say just his detail in terms of his pass rush skill. He's got a little bit more of a pass rush arsenal. When you're a guy, and now I think Grant can get there. I just think Grant's always been so big and strong, he can win just with weight and getting in a gap. Graham has a little bit more of an extenuated pass rush plan with his hands, push and pull. He can club, he can rip. He's also very stout against the run. He plays with a little bit better leverage, a little bit better pad level, all things that Grant can learn and do better, but his size has always allowed him to be better. And I think that wrestling background just gives Graham better balance and leverage right now at the point of attack.
So we've looked at the two Michigan guys. Third guy we're going to look at, Ohio State guy, Tyleik Williams, 6'3", 334 pounds. What do you see when you look at him?
Now, you know, the defensive ends, and a lot of people have talked about a bunch of different stuff. You're going to see this guy, Tyleik Williams, 330 pounds, right here on a stunt. That first play. Now, on this one, you're going to see him. He attacks and then gets hands rid of, a little double swipe, and he arrives angry again. Again, a guy who's 330 pounds. You're going to see him here. Does a great job of extending, getting rid of the guard, getting rid of that tackle, and throwing him inside. What he does really, really well is that, I think he's the best player on that defensive line, a defensive line that's probably going to have 4 to 5 NFL players on it. I think he has the biggest, hugest ability, the ceiling with this guy because he's 330 pounds. He does not absolutely move like a 330-pounder. In fact, I think he's closer to Graham than anybody else in the draft, even more than Grant. Now, the thing is, he's going to have to play the run a little bit. He's going to have to be more stout on first and second down. But physical tools, he has as good a physical tools as anybody else, including Grant and Graham in this draft.
Yeah, it looks like for a big guy that he can move as well. And the motor looks pretty, in watching him, for a guy that's 335 pounds, he looks pretty relentless.
Well, yeah, and I would say the only thing that has hurt him is that at times he will play, like a lot of college kids do. Hall did the same thing. They play with high pad level because they were able to their whole career. He'll have to learn how to not play with such high pad level, but you can teach that. You can't teach what he does. You can't teach his side and his explosiveness. I'm telling you, that guy, he's going to be a great pro because of that explosiveness, that short area burst.
So the fourth guy that we're going to look at, defensive tackle, Darius Alexander, 6'4", 305 pounds, from the Mid-American Conference, Toledo, a guy that you heard at the Combine kind of moving up boards.
Well, had a tremendous Senior Bowl. So you're going to see him here. He is a strong guy. First thing he's going to do, that's Pittsburgh, he's going to drive the guard back in. Now you're going to see him on the right guard. He does a great job of getting rid of, being violent with his hands, using his hands in space, seeing the ball. Then you're going to see him drop here. He's going to drop into coverage. He's a spy, and he picks the ball off. So he's got great ball skills. He's got great athletic ability. See him return it for a touchdown. The thing you like about this guy is that he has, now they move him out to the end. And now he's gonna bull rush and get the quarterback out. So a couple things really stand out because of the 53-man roster. He can play multiple positions. He can play inside. He can play outside. He can drop. He can rush the passer. He can play the run. He's a guy that's very intriguing because he played in the MAC. The thing that sold me is his Senior Bowl week. He just dominated high-level players with his athletic ability. 6'4", 300-plus pounds, great upside, position flexible. He's a guy that'll probably be around on day 3, and if he is, he'll be a steal for someone who gets him in on day 3.
Yeah, and relative to the MAC, remember Braden Fisk, who ended up going and playing really well at Florida State, spent 3 years at Western Michigan. He played pretty well as a rookie. So I wouldn't, and I get the whole competition in the NFL. Guys from the MAC usually can play some defense, though.
Well, the thing the best thing I would tell everybody, because I've been asked this question, I will say this: when you go to the MAC as a defense or an offensive lineman, a lot of times you'll be just as good. The guys who go to Ohio State and they go to Michigan, they go to Penn State, Florida State, those guys are 6'6" and they're 300+ pounds when they get there. These guys that go to the MAC, these guys have the frames, right? So they might be 6'5", 230. But their frame is there. And that's kind of what happens with these guys in the MAC, is that they go there and they get developed. And the MAC coaching is outstanding. So they get really well coached. They eat really well. They lift really well. And then they fill out that frame. Those tight end, those MAC guys that they go to Eastern Michigan to be a tight end, they put on 50 pounds and now they're a tackle and now they're an NFL prospect because they have those tight end feet. So that's what really the MAC, especially the offensive defensive line, is just that they need to be developed and grow into that man body, which, ends up happening. And that's why you get a guy like Darius Alexander.
Yeah, and, Max Crosby is from Eastern Michigan. So he just signed a pretty nice contract extension with the Las Vegas Raiders. So there is a history of guys like Darius Alexander coming into the league and doing well.
Well, if you look at the Power 4 schools, for me, it's all about depth, right? So at Eastern Michigan, those guys at Eastern Michigan, those guys at Toledo, especially the high-end level MAC schools, they can play with anybody in the country. The difference is at Ohio State and Michigan, those second and thirds, they're the same as the first guys. That doesn't necessarily happen at the MAC schools, especially with NIL. But if you look at the first level, the starters on most MAC schools, especially like the Toledos, the Ball States in Northern Illinois, those guys can play with anybody in the country. Northern Illinois, who went to Notre Dame, that wasn't a fluke. That was physical, up front, fifth-year seniors moving the ball in a really good Notre Dame defense. That was not a fluke whatsoever. So it's just development when you get to the MAC. They do a great job of developing, and those guys growing. It's what can I develop this guy into, not what he is already.
Time for another break. When we return, we stay on the line, but we turn it over to the offensive line, special edition of Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
This special edition of Sports for CLE continues. Earlier this week, the Browns signed 33-year-old tackle Lucas Cornelius to a 2-year contract. Jack Conklin has been banged up, and he's getting a little older. This is a draft where the Browns could very well look to get younger at the offensive tackle position. How much of the Browns' offensive line struggles, and there were a lot of them, they were injured. That's certainly some of it. How much of it is guys getting old? And how much of it is they were just asking guys to do things in a new scheme that they didn't do very well?
Well, the drop-off from what they did, that tells me it's not age. And I've heard a lot. They are aging, and they are getting a little bit older. But those guys are also really good at what they do. And I'm going to give you an example. So when the Browns run the ball really well, they can run play action. And as a defensive line, you have to stop the run first. And when you stop the run first, then that offensive lineman sets the pass. There's a lot that goes into it. The Browns have been in this pass first mode for a couple years now, and that's a totally different mindset for an offensive lineman. This mindset for this offensive line has been run the ball really well, use play action to throw the ball. They can get into some empty sets and throw some play action, but they have been 100% relying on drop back protection with no run game. That allows the defensive line not to play the run. And when you don't play the run, you're just pinning your ears back and coming. That's impossible for an offensive line that has not. That's not why these guys are brought in. That's not what the strength of this is. So they immediately improve, in my opinion, by going back to what they do well. Yes, they've aged. Yes, there's some, but they'll be much better simply by being in a scheme that they had a ton of success in, and that's what they're going to get this fall, I believe.
All right, so offensive tackle is obviously an area the Browns will look at. Let's take a look at a couple of the top-end guys that are out there. First one we're going to start with is Kelvin Banks. So take us through what you see with Banks, what you like with him.
Well, top guy in the draft, you're going to see him here at the left tackle. He's going to pull around. Movement skills are the key at tackle. You're talking about a big guy. Then you're going to see him in space here. You're talking about a guy who's 6'4", 340 running in space here, 320 to 340 range. So the thing you like about him, he's got ability to move like a guard in terms of pulling. He's got great movement skills and power. He locks on. He does all the little things you want as an offensive lineman. His upside is incredibly high. That's why he's number one on my board as compared to Will Campbell. This guy can move in space. He can pass set. He can run. His feet are always right. He has a great base. He gets his hands inside. He has a very violent punch. He does all the little things, plus he's a super athlete. So this is the guy, if he's available, if they decide to trade down and they go with the route of we're going to not rebuild but kind of reload, then you start with the offense and defensive line. And this is the guy that I think you got to go with. If you trade down, Banks has got to be your guy. So talented, big, fast, physical. He can do just about everything, especially in this Browns scheme that they're going to go back to. He would be outstanding.
All right, and yeah, you see him there running and moving downfield to lead the way. The next guy we're going to talk about, you mentioned him, Will Campbell from LSU. What do you see with him? What do you like?
Well, you're going to see Will Campbell here. First of all, you're going to see him get to the second level and latch on that linebacker. Really, really good. Just incredible second level. Next thing, you're going to see him reach. He's going to, this is called setting the edge, right? So he's going to set the edge so his back can get out. Now, what Will Campbell does is, I'm not by any means is he Joe Thomas, but what he does, it reminds me of Joe Thomas, he makes everything look really, really easy when he's doing it, and it's not easy. So he has great balance. He always has a good base. He has a really nasty punch when he's punching with pass set. Again, a guy who can pass set. He played for Brian Kelly, which is always, the scheme is important coming into the NFL. So he's been in a huddle. He's run zone. He's run multiple gap schemes. He's done all those things that he will do in the NFL with Brian Kelly, who's more of a pro-style offense. But this guy is 6'6", he's 320, can run really well. Again, I would say his thing that I love about him is he's a technician. He always seems to be in balance. His hands always seem to be right. He knows where he's going. He understands his rules. The only reason I have Banks higher than him is just because Banks has that freakish athleticism that maybe will, this Campbell's a guy who came, he was the Louisiana's top player coming in. He starts as a freshman. He started 38 games. This is a really talented guy, massive guy, him and Banks are guys that can anchor that offensive line for years and years and years if that's the route the Browns go.
All right, so the third draft eligible tackle that we'll look at is Wyatt Milum. What do you see with him? What do you like with Milum?
Well, you're going to see Milum here. So Milum first, you're going to see him here. There's going to be a twist. So he's going to put his hands on the left defensive end. Then he's going to see that backer come in and pick him up. And we'll go back over that again. So really good vibe. Then you're going to see here, this guy is he's going to put his left foot in the ground. He's going to drive this guy down inside. Then he's going to finish. Now, Milum kind of reminds me of Wyatt Teller. So again, you're going to see him, backside guard's going to pull. He's going to help with his left hand. Then he's going to see that blitzing backer. And that's really good understanding of who's coming. So his number one quality is that he's nasty. And he kind of goes back to that offensive line with Callahan, getting off the line of scrimmage and knocking people backwards. He has as good a punch and as violent as hands as any tackle in the draft, including Banks and Campbell. He's not as athletic or maybe as technically sound, but this is a guy who's trying to put you in the ground. There's a difference. Some guys are trying to block you. Some guys are trying to put you on the ground. This guy's trying to put you on the ground, and you're going to see his eyes where they need to be. He understands fronts. He understands coverages. But what I like about Milum is that he's nasty. And the Browns have to get back to knocking people off the line of scrimmage. If they're going to run the ball, it can't be about finesse and fundamentals all the time. It's got to be, I'm versus you, and I'm going to move you against your will. And this is what this guy does. So if they, this is a day 2, early day 3 guy, but this is a guy that fits tremendously in what the Browns are doing offensively, I believe. So, and again, I just love his mentality. He brings a nasty mentality to that Browns offense line room with Wyatt, Teller, Bitonio getting back to what they do to try to run the ball and be successful.
How far away, we've talked about the struggles they had. How far away are the Browns from again being a above average to good offensive line?
Well, first of all, it starts with scheme, right? So you talk about those 3 guys inside. They are aging, and I understand that. But Posick, Bitonio, and Teller, if they're running zone counter, they're pulling. I remember watching Bitonio in his postseason interview. I only pulled a couple times. So that's what he does really well. Gets in space. They're athletic. They're nasty. Wyatt Teller's a guy who likes to knock you down. You've seen him do it 100 times when he pulls. So I think this scheme immediately gives them confidence because they're going to know what they're doing. And if you know what you're doing, you play with your hair on fire. And that's what they need to do. Now they bring in a tackle that kind of, if they can bring in a tackle that with Conklin, who I think is going to be outstanding, I think he's out at that right. They bring in a tackle at that left side who's athletic and can protect and pass protection and be a part of what they want to do in the run game. They're not that far away because they immediately improve. The age thing to me is overblown. It's because they were running new stuff. You're going to see them have a much more success. Now, will they be dominant like they were 4 years ago? That's yet to be seen. But I think the scheme gives them a chance. They need a tackle. They need some depth. They need an influx of young guys who are nasty and can move their feet. But they're not far away. They're a couple players away, an offensive line coach away from being what they were to a certain extent. And again, that can be really good with all the pieces around them.
Yeah, you led me to where I was thinking of going. Do you think it's any coincidence at all that they went and got a disciple of Bill Callahan to become their new offensive line coach, a guy who has had head coaching experience?
That's exactly right. So when offensive line, it's the hardest position. It's the most thankless position in the game of football. Nothing happens with the offensive line. They only get their name called when they're holding or offsides. But you are not good at quarterback, running back, receiver unless your offensive line's good. You have to build from the inside out. So I think you're exactly right. Now, the thing that I liked about Callahan when he was here, Callahan is a all business guy all day. And I made a point, I've said this to you before, watching my first half hour of practice was always watching Callahan. So no, I don't think it was coincidental at all. I think they're going to say, we're going to go back to what we do, what I know, what I can fix. And that starts with the offensive line. And I think they'll be much improved really, really quick here.
Time for another quick timeout. On the other side of the break, we'll look inside to the interior offensive line. Special edition of Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. Special edition of Sports for CLE, film breakdown, video analysis of different positional groups continues. Last year, the Browns drafted Zach Zinter, struggled a little bit in his rookie year. They have Joel Bitonio, probably his last year, Wyatt Teller getting up in age. The Browns may very well look to get younger on the interior offensive line in this draft. So Lance, more about the offensive linemen. We did a little bit of that earlier. Kind of more interior guys this time around. And before we get rolling, how much of the struggles do you think the Browns had last year on the offensive line were related to scheme change and those kind of things, and injury, and how much were related to guys just kind of getting old?
Well, I think the getting old. I'm not looking a lot into that until I see him play this year. That scheme really hurt him. So when they get back into their scheme, into what they do really well, I think they're going to be pretty successful. Obviously, they are getting older, but Batonio's better on the run. Wyatt Teller's better as a down blocker. Posic's good in space. They had him doing things that weren't really them, and it was all new to them. So I'm interested to see. Before I'm going to hold my judgment, because I want to see how they do with the new offensive line coach, who's going to have Callahan type practice plans and things like that. I look forward to watching them this year in practice. It was a lot different in terms of how they practiced. Callahan is a no-nonsense, in-your-face guy. We'll see what happens. I think they're going to be okay. I think it's more due to the scheme than it is age.
All right, so we talked about it a little bit, just so everybody's kind of on the same page when we move forward. Relative to what they did before, they kind of got out and moved. It was more like setting picks in basketball this year, so they weren't firing off and getting down, the ineligible linemen downfield play calls, rather.
Yeah, it's the easiest way to look at it is it was all zone. Dorsey's a zone guy, so they ran a little bit of dart, which is the backside tackle pulling, but they didn't pull the guards on the counter, the power, the pin and pull. What has made them successful? If you go power and counter, very similar. Pin and pulls when you get those guards out and around like a sweep. The old Green Bay sweep is an easy way to look at it. They weren't on the move a lot. This year was all about just kind of doubling and trying to get to the second level. But the thing that was really different, in my opinion, Dave, is the fact that they weren't physical. Regardless of the scheme, they were not physical at the point of attack. So whatever scheme it was, a double team's a double team, and they just weren't moving people like they did the previous years. Now, is that coaching? I don't like to blame one person. It's just a different philosophy, and the Callahan philosophy is kind of no nonsense. The down blocks, the pulling, the getting to the second level on weak side wide zone. Those things were what made the run game so good. And they had a really good running back who made them look good as well. So there's a combination of everything that happens. But, yeah, it's more of regardless, it's a physical style run game more than the scheme.
All right, so let's take a look. These are mostly interior guys. Some have actually, they all have some flexibility. First one we're going to look at is Tyler Booker from Alabama, listed as guard tackle, 6'5", 325 pounds. What do you like about him?
Well, he's a mauler. He's got long arms. He can play. You're going to see here, he gets inside, turns that guy on a pin and pull, bash look here. So really, really strong torque, lower base. He does a lot of things very well. Very good in pass protection here. You're going to see him pat and then go help on his center. Next, you're going to see him get out and around. I think great movement skills. All these guys have great movement skills in space. This is a guy, like you said, is 325 pounds. He's the prototype. Went to Alabama as a 5-star, really big, thick kid. He is really, really good at down blocking. And if they're going to go back to the power counter, these guys that I really like are really going to be good in Stefanski's old scheme. Now, depending on what that is, if it's something different, maybe these guys wouldn't be the answer. But these are guys, centers and guards, who can really move more than most centers and guards. They pull very well. They block at the point of attack very well. And this guy Booker, he'd be an early, maybe second-day pick. Really, really talented, big physical kid. Really like him. I like his long arms. That means he can 34-inch arms. He can go out and play tackle too if needed. So flexibility is that as an offensive lineman is very important, especially if you're not going to be a starter.
And again, played at Alabama, so that's interesting. You mentioned 5-star recruit. All right, next guy from a little bit smaller school, Jackson Slater, Sacramento State, guard center, 6'3", still big at 320.
So these are my favorite guys to break down, the ones no one really knows. So this is, you're going to see him pull. You're going to see the outside linebacker, strong safety. He's going to pull and kick out. You're going to see his bend in his knees. Gets his head across inside, which creates that big hole. You're going to see here, he's actually going to block this 3 technique. They're in charge of those two. Does a great job. It's hard to explain how hard that is when a guy is outside of you. He goes inside. So this is going to be the guard pulling. You see the bend. He's got great bend, great leverage when he gets there. He's got a little bit of attitude. Then you're going to see here, this is a double team. These two are going to double team to that backer. That guy goes inside, so he's got to adjust and go to the second level. His athleticism shows up when he gets to that second level and has to block linebackers. Because if you're going to block linebackers in space, you have to have good short area quickness and good lateral movement. He's got a little bit of nastiness to him. I really don't break down a lot of finesse running linemen, especially if the Browns are going back to what they do well. These guys all have a little bit of nasty in them. They like to block. They like to run block. They pull very well, and they're very, very good in pass protection. So this is a guy that, these smaller school guys, these linemen from smaller school guys, I really like because they go to these smaller schools because they're 240 or they're tight ends, and they're really athletic kids, and they're 240 pounds. Then all of a sudden, they turn into grown men, and they go from 240 to 320 with natural growth, weight room, food. So these are the guys who are really good athletes. Really like this guy. I think he can be a good. This would be an early day 3 guy. Really, really like this guy. I think he can really help the Browns. And once again, he's a guy not as long as arm, so he'd be more of a guard center.
All right, the next guy we're going to talk about is a guy who really made a name for himself during the Senior Bowl, opened up a lot of eyes. Gray Zabel, North Dakota State, and he can play pretty much anywhere on the line. 6'5", 316 pounds.
The term I use for you're going to see him here. So a lot of good clips here. So once again, he's going to step down. If you see him pounding his feet, getting to the linebacker, getting to the defensive lineman, you're going to see here great job on the twist, keeping his balance. You're going to see him here setting the edge. You're going to see him get his hips around, which is really hard to do. So you're going to see him step with the right foot, come down. That lineman steps in his way, and that's called a railroad, where you're just going to block anything in your path on a down block. And that's one of the key plays that the Browns block when you talk about a down block. Now, this is a guy I love. He was 240 coming out of high school. A 3-sport kid. I love kids who don't specialize because it teaches them competitiveness. In this day of specialization, I love guys who play multiple sports. I think it's important they learn competitive things in different sports, different spatial awareness. His body control and spatial awareness are outstanding. He went to the Senior Bowl, played all the positions. This is a guy who's invaluable. This will be a late first-round pick, early second-day pick. You get a guy like this in the second round, you're really, really happy because in the NFL with a 53-man roster, this guy can play guard, center, and tackle. Super athletic. Like I said, he plays with a little bit of nastiness. This North Dakota State program has produced a lot of really good pros. They take kids who are really athletic and then get them in the weight room, get them fed, and they turn into really good football players and potential pros. This guy is a really good player. Again, you said it bad. In the Senior Bowl, he was absolutely dominant. If you watch all his reps, he goes against the best of the best and handles himself very, very well.
Are you concerned at all about North Dakota State? That's a FCS, so the old 1AA. It's not the Alabamas and the the SECs. But you do mention that Carson Wentz went there. There's a lot of NFL guys that have played at that program, in that program.
Well, there's two things, right? Is who are they going against? Obviously, it's not the level of competition. But, when you break down the film, the thing that I'm looking for is their movement skills at their size, their spatial awareness, their ability to get off the football. Do they understand the fronts they're seeing? The difference between an FCS school and Division I or 1AA, I'll call it. I'll show my age. But the difference between them is usually the depth. Those first-level guys at all college programs are usually pretty good. Everybody says, go watch a Mount Union game or a John Carroll game. There's a lot of really good football players. So what it really comes to is these guys go to these smaller schools because they're not into their frames yet, right? So he was 240 when he got to North Dakota State. Now he's pushing 320 because of the weight room and just natural growth. So no, I don't worry about it as much, especially inside, because that's a position where you have to grow. And the best players are grown men inside, right? Those guys who are third and fourth and fifth year seniors who are 22, 23 years old who are now grown men. So not from the smaller schools, not when it comes to linemen, especially as interior guys. And that's what the combine for is the Senior Bowl. So you go see how you're going to do against those guys. And I think it's important. And he's really shown up in those situations.
All right, before I let you go, how big of a jump is, we know the jump for quarterbacks. We know the jump for wide receivers. There's route trees. How big of a jump is it for a lineman, an offensive lineman, to go from playing even elite level college to the NFL?
Well, there is, in my opinion, there's no harder position than offensive defensive line, but especially offensive line. And here's why. If you think we're going to use college for an example, and it's even more prevalent in the NFL. You go to college as an 18-year-old kid, you're a lineman, you're a right tackle. You go to a big school, you go to Ohio State, Michigan. You're 6'5", 300 pounds, but you're a little kid. You're 18 years old. The growth between 18 and 23 is amazing. You're a grown man when you leave. So think about that now when you go to the NFL. Now you're, again, a freshman in the NFL. You're 23 years old, and you're playing against guys who are, in their late 20s, early 30s who are in their prime. And you need time in the weight room. So a lot of those small, if you pick a lineman in the second, third, fourth, fifth round. Sometimes those guys just need a little bit of a development, just because of the fact they're going against grown men, and it just takes time to grow into that frame and grow into that strength and that leverage. So I think it's a very, very big jump. It's a skill guy is a skill guy. If you can catch and run, you can catch and run. Those big guys inside, it's a different world. I have a lot of respect for those guys. That's really a hard position to play.
We're going to step aside, take one more time out on this special edition of Sports for CLE. When we return, Tim Bielik joins us. He and I will have the first Sports for CLE mock draft of this season. Straight ahead on Sports for CLE. Stay with us. Full Court Action is a half hour devoted exclusively to men's and women's basketball from across the Mid-American Conference. Hello everybody, I'm Dave Bacon. Join me at 6:30 Tuesday nights and we'll meet the coaches and players from the Mid-American Conference who are making an impact in basketball. Full Court Action will spotlight the top plays and performances from all across the Mid-American Conference with some historical action as well. Catch Full Court Action Tuesday nights at 6:30 on Rock Entertainment Sports Network. We continue talking Browns on Sports for CLE. This special edition, we've taken a look at a lot of the names that the Browns are going to be looking at on the lines of scrimmage, both sides of the ball in the upcoming draft. Let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Tim, you've written some draft articles, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the free agency before we get into a mock draft that you and I will do. I'm curious, why do you think the Browns are poised to be part of the league's running back renaissance in this NFL draft?
I think the answer is pretty simple. It's because this is the best running back draft we've seen in a really long time. Obviously, Browns aren't going to use the second pick, I would imagine, on Boise State's Ashton Jeanty. But if you look up and down the draft boards and some of the big names that are available, you've got Omarion Hampton from North Carolina, powerful guy with explosion. We all know about the Ohio State duo of Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. You have Caleb Johnson from Iowa. You have Cam Scatterbo from Arizona State. And then other sleeper guys like R.J. Harvey from UCF, Damian Martinez from Miami. I could go on and on and on. But the point is, this is as deep a running back draft class as I think we've ever seen. And for a Browns team that really still, I think, needs a number one running back and 3 day 2 picks to play with, including the 33rd overall, the first one of day 2, you look at this class that is really deep and also very athletic, as I pointed out in the article as well, that when you look at this NFL draft running back class, I know you want to, sometimes I think you have to take the NFL combine results with a grain of salt, but if you look at this running back class just in the 40-yard dash, this year's running back class alone had 14 guys go sub 4.5. It had Bashal Tutin from Virginia Tech run a 4.32 to lead everybody, but 14 guys sub 4.5. And if you want to compare that to 2024, there were only 8 running backs that did that. And in 2023, there were only 7. So that's almost as many in one draft as the previous 2 drafts combined. Add in the fact that you got guys who were 221 pounds, and Omarion Hampton and Quinshon Judkins, they both ran sub 4.5. So you're looking at very talented running backs. And a Browns team that was 29th in the NFL in rushing a year ago. There's almost no excuse to not take a running back, especially in day 2, if you can get one of these guys, because there's so many guys that scream number 1 running back in this class.
So the Browns make the trade to acquire Kenny Pickett, not a name that was on my radar. I think he's kind of a backup to another veteran, and I think it might signal that they may not, if Cam Ward isn't there, they may not take a quarterback. They may go with one of the other quarterbacks, if you will, later in the draft that they like, Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, and they just want to make sure they do not have to play said rookie quarterback until they're absolutely ready to.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there, and there's some sense to that theory. I personally would still take Shedeur Sanders second overall if Cam Ward is gone. I'm still a big believer. I'm of the opinion that I don't understand the massive negative buzz around him. Yeah, his arm's not the strongest, but I think it's good enough. I even tweeted this morning that he and Cam Ward had the exact same deep pass completion percentage. In fact, Shadur Sanders, the exact same amount of touchdown passes. They both had 14 TDs in 2024 on deep balls, according to PFF. But if you're talking about, if the Browns don't feel comfortable drafting Shadur Sanders, then plan B, I think certainly may be, you draft, say, Abdul Carter second overall or Travis Hunter second overall. You either get an elite young edge to pair with Myles Garrett or a potentially game-breaking receiver to put opposite Jerry Jeudy and help out your offense. And then maybe you come back, trade up in the first round if possible, and take Jalen Milroe, for example. I'm not the biggest Jalen Milroe guy, but I understand the appeal with him, maybe more so than Jackson Dart. And I feel like if you're going to draft Jalen Milroe, the number one thing you have to do is I think you have to do everything in your power to not play him as a rookie. Everything you can possibly do to not play him before he's ready to go, because he has a lot of work to do. Obviously, he seemed like he was retooling his footwork and stuff throughout this draft cycle, especially at the Combine, the Senior Bowl. He was rough at the Senior Bowl. Combine seemed like it was better. And he's got some work to do, kind of working on his mechanics, his footwork, his accuracy, things that are going to be important in the chemist of fantasy offense. But what you see in Milroe is high-end athleticism. We're talking somewhere between Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts as a runner, and obviously a beautiful deep ball. But it seems like some of his misses in the short and intermediate are mechanical, and those are things that have to be worked on behind the scenes. So maybe Kenny Pickett is that second bridge, and it makes sense, again, if you take a Milroe, like I said, who's a project, and I would not put out there unless I have absolutely no choice as a rookie, and then maybe in 2026 give him a shot to compete for the job.
So I know you also wrote an article about Curtis Rourke, Indiana kid, played for Indiana, was at Ohio University before that, played the entire season on a torn ACL. Do you think that makes him a late-round sleeper? I know you wrote an article about that.
It definitely makes him interesting, no question about it, because you look at the numbers he put up last season for Indiana, 69.4% completion rate, 3,042 yards, 29 touchdowns, 5 interceptions on an Indiana team that was one of the feel-good stories of the entire college season, pretty much coming out of nowhere to make it to the 12-team playoff. And the only two teams they lost to all season were the teams that played for the national championship in Ohio State and Notre Dame. And then we find out at the end of the season, after Indiana loses at Notre Dame, that Curtis Rourke found out he's playing the end of the season through a torn ACL, which is absolutely remarkable that he could put up those kind of numbers on a torn ACL. It's incredible to think about. And I think it almost helps his case, and it kind of explains another stat, because looking at his numbers, he had at least three consecutive seasons, of at least 200 yards rushing for Ohio. Last season with the Hoosiers, minus 35. So that kind of explains it a little bit, that, you're not going to run the football much when you have a torn ACL. And talking to him, he said he'd actually felt something. He got the MRI in July saying it was a partially torn. It seemed like he didn't know exactly when it fully tore, but he said that he really he loves the game of football so much he just didn't want to miss as any time as possible. And he had to miss a game because of having thumb surgery. He missed one game because of it. So I think there's a lot to like. I think about Curtis Rourke. He's just played so much football, big, mobile, tough. I mean, you cannot question this guy's toughness, playing an entire season in the Big Ten against Michigan and Ohio State on a torn ACL. I mean, it's just remarkable. And I think it's certainly that kind of toughness and tenacity and experience. I think that's something worth taking a flyer on late in the draft.
All right, before we go, let's do this mock draft. So we are going to use Pro Football Network's mock draft. It allows for some trades. For the Browns, we're doing 4 rounds. So go ahead and let's start this and see who the Titans take. Cam Ward, what a shock. So Cam Ward is off the board to the Titans. You see who they have there. You got Abdul Carter. You got Travis Hunter. You got Mason Graham. Shadur Sanders is obviously on the board. I'm tempted to take Abdul Carter. Talk me out of that, Tim.
I mean, I kind of have a hard time doing it, and there's a reason I kind of have been a little not 100% on Abdul Carter, and maybe it's flawed reasoning on my part, but you have an offense that was historically awful in 2024. And I know it's just one pick, but it's the second pick in the draft. And to use it on a defensive player when you just sign, especially a defensive end, when you just sign Myles Garrett to a 4-year extension worth $160 million, it's kind of a weird look in a sense. I get you have to draft the best player available, and I understand it. But I do feel like, with Abdul Carter, I 100% get it. He was outstanding at Penn State last season, especially the game against Ohio State against Donovan Jackson, who certainly proved throughout the season from that game on that he could be a left tackle. Maybe even in the NFL, he could be a left tackle. So it's an interesting proposition because essentially you're choosing a number 2 edge rusher versus a number 2 receiver who I think could be a number 1. Andrew Berry talked about how he feels Travis Hunter is a receiver, and I don't doubt it. I think Hunter, you can put him opposite Jerry Jeudy, and whoever's the quarterback in this situation is going to be in a much better position to succeed because then you have multiple quality receivers, especially if you believe Cedric Tillman is going to continue to rise as he did towards the end of last season. I'm just curious, where's Shedeur Sanders in these rankings?
So keep going. There you go. He is
number 10.
10. So he's top 10.
Yeah. That's good enough for me. If he's top 10 prospect on someone's board, I would take him.
All right. Well,
I'll
defer to you. I get to make the next one then. So at 33, I get to, and we'll have some trade offers, I'm sure.
All right. I'm kind of surprised we didn't get any there. You would think it seems like the Giants and the Jets would be like aching for a quarterback.
We did try to force one of those early, and they would not take it. I wanted their second pick, and they wouldn't give us the second pick. Their second pick to move up. All right, so we're going towards the bottom of the first round, and
the Ravens just took Emeka Egbuka there.
All right. So we have the Patriots offering 38 and 77 for 33. All right, that's the only offer we have. Hide that one for a minute, and let's see who is on the board here. Williams, Grant, Jackson. Switch over to the offensive side, Brian. Yeah, let's go ahead and make that trade. Gives us another pick in the first 4 rounds.
I mean, I'm on board with that too, considering they have a slew of picks in day 3, especially in that 6th round. I mean, if you can move on from a couple of those and move up in the draft, especially in that day 2 range, I think you're going to be in a great spot if you're the Browns.
All right, I don't want to move all the way back to 49, so reject that one. Yeah, I don't want that one either. I don't want any. We're not doing future rounds. All right, so we got Fannin, we got Isery, Tyleik Williams is still there. Kenneth Grant's there too. We got the quarterback. I'm going to go with Kenneth Grant, just because they released. They had the salary cap issue to clear some space. So let's take Kenneth Grant. They released Dalvin Tomlinson. I was blanking on his name for a minute there. So I'm going to go Grant. You can make the next pick coming up here, Tim.
All right, I would say I do like Kenneth Grant. I think, putting him with Mike Hall Jr., I think they can complement each other real well because Mike Hall Jr. is more of a pass rush D tackle, and I think Kenneth Grant's more of a run stuffer. Probably got overshadowed a little bit by playing next to Mason Graham, but I think Kenneth Grant certainly is first-round caliber type. Certainly could sneak in the first round.
All right. So, no, we're not going to do that one. It's too far back. All right, let's look at the offense. Specifically, let's look at running backs and wide receivers. We need some playmakers. You like any of them at 67?
I really like Caleb Johnson. Powerful back, physical, got some burst to him, and the thing that stands out about Caleb Johnson is he's a very patient runner. I feel like if the Browns are going to more of the wide zone scheme with Kevin Stefanski, I feel like it benefits. It's good to have a patient running back who's going to look for a lane and then really attack it with speed and power. And I think Caleb Johnson really fits that mold for me.
Let's look at the other available running backs, see who else is there, Brian, if you click on that. Scadoo, you got that? Okay. Click on the wide receivers real quick. Higgins, Noel, Restrepo. All right. You want to do Caleb Johnson? Are you concerned at all about the slow 40 time at the combine, Tim?
No, I think, I'm more concern is, is he going to be able to pick up chunks of 10 and 20 yards rather than, 40, 50, 60 yards? Because I feel like if you can get chunk plays, that makes any kind of offense easier. And for the Browns, essentially, you have your speed back in Jerome Ford, who can be a home run hitter. I think you need a guy who's going to, constantly get 4 or 5, 6 yards and really press the line of scrimmage. And, even if he's a guy who doesn't rip off an 80-yard run, if you got a guy that constantly breaks off 20 and 30-yard runs, like a David Montgomery, I mean, that's incredibly valuable. You see what he's done for the Detroit Lions.
All right, let's go ahead and we'll take Caleb Johnson from Iowa. We got another one coming up in 10 picks after our trade, I believe. Yeah, reject that one. Now I think let's see who's available here. The 82 might intrigue me. So hide that one and let's see what we got. Go offense for a minute, Brian. You got Gunnar Helmy, so you got a tight end. Higgins is still there. Restrepo is still there. Go back to all of them. TJ Sanders, Kennard. Who do you like out of those, Tim?
Hayden Higgins for me. I think size, speed, the fact that pretty much anything he gets his hands on, he's going to catch. And I think obviously having that size with Cedric Tillman as well, you get another big body out there and you kind of let Jerry Jeudy kind of have that flexibility to play outside or inside. You can really create a lot of options if you have a big guy like Jaden Higgins who's quick. He's got enough speed and his hands are absolutely sensational. So I think for me, he's my pick.
Yeah, I was between Higgins and Restrepo. I like Restrepo, but Higgins, let's go ahead and take Higgins with the 77th pick. So I think we have 94 as our next pick, which might be the final one.
It looks like we still have 103.
Oh, 103, yep. I forgot we did. All right, here we go. They just went to Shamar Turner. Go to the next one. Click next, Brian. Let's see what we got here. Who's still on the board? Go ahead and minimize that. Oh, Latham Ransom. We do need a safety. Look at the offense. See what offense is. Who do you like out of here, Tim?
I really like Holland Pierce, the tackle for Rutgers, big guy. Obviously the Browns signed Cornelius Lucas, but I think, adding more talent on the offensive line, especially if you want to continue that youth movement there. I think adding a guy like Pierce with some size, I think you can really start to kind of see the future of that offensive line and, potentially get another starter in there, considering Jack Conklin's getting up there in age, although it was good for the Browns that he was able to play through the season last year.
So would you go Pierce above Scadaboo? I'm tempted just because I think you need some playmakers, but I get what you're saying with the offensive line and getting younger.
I will say, I have said before, I have a man crush on Cam Scadaboo in this draft.
Now we have another.
He's my guy.
You know what? We'll roll the dice because we have another pick coming up at 103. So let's take Scadaboo. Just because.
What's on? Okay, I was gonna say I would have also considered Josiah Stewart, even though he's more of a pure pass rusher. I feel like that's a guy you could still use.
All right, so go ahead and reject that. And our tackle went. So who do you like here?
I mean, I'm torn between a couple things here because we've gone all offense in this mock draft. So I'm tempted to throw the defense some love and go with Jordan Birch from Oregon, just to add more depth on the defensive line. I really liked how Birch played last season for Oregon. He's a former 5-star prospect, really good lineman. But then I also look at, do you want to double up on quarterback and take Will Howard at 103? Because we saw Shedeur. What's interesting is because we took Shedeur in this mock, and he really went to bat for Will Howard on Twitter after Will Howard did not have a good combine. So I wonder I know Browns just traded for Kenny Pickett. I wonder how Shedeur would feel about being a teammate of Will Howard, because there are different quarterbacks as far as like size and game almost. Because Howard's got a much stronger arm. He's bigger. He's mobile. He's been able to come through in big situations. I think where he needs to continue to develop is he needs to be more willing to take shots down the field, and we saw him really do that over the course of last season.
Click on the defense just real quick. We did take the D tackle from Michigan early in the 3rd round, so we did get a D tackle. You know what? Let's go with Will Howard. Go with Will Howard because you can never throw enough quarterbacks at a Browns team. So when you look at it, and again, the Browns will have the opportunity to move up, down, and all around, just based on what they do. They got to get, Tim. They got to get playmakers. They got to get guys that threaten the defense with the ball in their hand. I think the defense will improve if the offense doesn't turn the ball over and has some guys that can make plays, and they're not constantly going 3 and out.
Yeah, I think that's an underrated thing. It's hard to play. It's hard enough to play defense in the NFL as it is. If you're constantly being thrown out on the field every 2 minutes of a game because your offense can't get a first down, can't sustain drives, can't put points on the board, I don't care how good your defense is. They're going to struggle in an NFL where, we talk so much about complementary football. It's a phrase that Kevin Stefanski likes to use. You can't have complementary football if your defense is good and your offense is just not at all very good. And we saw just how historically poor, as I said, that offense was a year ago. You have to really improve that, I think, significantly, at least to be average, to really see the defense become closer to the form it was in 2023.
Tim Bielik, as always, great stuff. We will do this again as we get closer and closer to the draft. But we end up with some playmakers, a couple quarterbacks, and a D tackle to get that thing done on the defensive line. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
Thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out, Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Always insightful stuff relative to the NFL draft. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.